Welcome to Life Stories, where the people you overlook become the ones who own everything. Imagine spending your whole life trying to earn a single "I'm proud of you" from the person who should have said it first. Now imagine what happens when that quiet, invisible girl grows up and ends up holding the keys to her father's empire. This is not a story about revenge. It's a story about silence, power, and the haunting question: what happens when the one they dismissed becomes the one they can't ignore? Stay with us, because what unfolds next will break your heart, challenge your sense of justice, and maybe, just maybe, make you see yourself a little clearer. Now let's begin. It started, as many things do, with silence. Not the kind that soothes or wraps around you like a warm blanket. No, this silence was different. It buzzed beneath the skin, lived in the spaces between words unsaid. Emily Claiborne had grown up inside that silence, sitting at long oak dinner tables under the crystal glow of chandeliers that felt colder than the snow outside their Seattle estate. In those moments, she learned how to disappear without leaving the room. Her father, Frank Claiborne, was a man of few words and fewer affections. He didn't need to raise his voice to make a statement. His gaze, or the lack of it, did the work for him. He had a way of looking at her brothers, Brandon and Tyler, that made them stand a little taller, puff their chests a bit more. With pride, with belief, with ownership. But when it came to Emily, his eyes simply slid past her like she was another piece of furniture in the room. Present, functional, irrelevant. Brandon, the eldest, was the golden boy, with a talent for business and a jawline made for magazine covers. Tyler, the youngest, was the sports prodigy, with charm that could melt frozen rivers and a shelf lined with trophies to prove it. Frank beamed at their wins, hosted backyard parties when Tyler scored a winning goal, printed business cards for Brandon before he even graduated college. When Emily got into Stanford on a scholarship, Frank's response had been a muted, "Well, that's good," spoken while buttering his toast. So she stopped seeking applause. Instead, she studied, watched, learned how men like her father moved through the world, what they valued, what they dismissed. She buried her anger under layers of discipline, sharpening it into something useful. While her brothers lived out loud, Emily grew in shadows. And unlike them, she never needed to be told she was special. She knew the price of invisibility, and she planned to make it her greatest weapon. It wasn't until she was 29 that she decided to resurface. But she wouldn't return home with a resume and a nice dress. She would return with an empire. What no one at that dinner table knew was that for the past 5 years, Emily had been building a tech startup from the ground up. A discreet digital platform focused on privacy protection, one of the most lucrative niches in an age of online vulnerability. She had coded in cafes, pitched in rooms filled with skepticism, and signed deals with investors who didn't care about her last name, only her results. She changed her legal name after a quiet falling out with her family. Not out of spite, but survival. Claiborne became Blake, and Emily Blake became the CEO of one of Seattle's fastest rising tech firms, Silvra. No LinkedIn updates. No press releases tied to her family name. Her silence was intentional. So when she RSVP'd yes to the annual Claiborne Father's Day dinner after 2 years of ghosting, the group chat went still. Brandon replied with a single thumbs up. Tyler sent a GIF. Her father said nothing. The morning of the dinner, Emily walked into a glass front dealership and signed the final paperwork on a sleek, obsidian-colored electric vehicle. Beside her sat a leather envelope. Inside, the official documents of Silvra's acquisition of Claiborne Holdings, Inc., the real estate investment firm her father had built and run for over 30 years. It had been a vulnerable firm, over-leveraged, clinging to legacy clients and outdated tech systems. Emily had circled it like a hawk in a silent acquisition. Frank Claiborne never saw it coming. Now she did not come for a confrontation. She came for closure. That evening, Emily stepped onto the patio in a tailored midnight blue suit, heels clicking softly against the stone tiles. The familiar smell of grilled steak and bourbon in the air, Brandon's voice echoing a joke, Tyler showing off a watch. Her father stood at the head of the table, a scotch in hand, the king presiding over his court. When he saw her, he smiled, wide, showman wide. Well, look who remembered they have a family. She smiled back, polite and unreadable. Happy Father's Day. She sat through the dinner like a guest at someone else's life. The jokes, the stories, the easy affection that passed between them like old wine. When she finally stood, the room quieted. I brought something for you, she said to Frank. She walked out, returning seconds later with the envelope and a single key fob. Setting both in front of him, she stepped back. Frank raised an eyebrow, amused. This a retirement gift or a guilt offering? Emily gave no answer. Open it. He slid the document out, scanned the first few lines, and stopped. The color drained from his face. What is this? He asked, his voice suddenly hoarse. She didn't blink. Silvra, you might have seen the acquisition news. It wasn't public who was behind it. Frank stared at her. You bought Claiborne Holdings? Technically, she replied. Silvra did. I'm just the CEO. Tyler's jaw dropped. Brandon muttered something under his breath. But Frank? Frank just sat there, frozen. Then Emily leaned in, soft and devastating. So no, I'm not the black sheep anymore. I'm the one who owns the pasture. For a long beat, no one said anything. The air felt like static, thick and unbreathable. Frank looked down at the document again, then up at her, this time with something he had never shown before. Fear. And beneath that, something else. Something almost like respect. But it was too late. Emily turned, walked out to the car, and slid into the driver's seat. She didn't look back. But as she pulled out of the driveway, the headlights caught Frank still standing in the doorway, the envelope dangling in his hand like a white flag he'd never meant to wave. What does it take to finally be seen by someone who's refused to acknowledge your existence your whole life? Have you ever built something powerful in silence, just to prove that you could? But Emily's story doesn't end here, because when you take back what was stolen, some ghosts don't stay buried. Continue reading in part 2. It had been 3 days since the dinner. Emily sat alone in her office, floor-to-ceiling windows pouring golden light across her polished desk. Outside, Seattle shimmered under a summer haze, but inside her chest, it was winter again. Cold, still, quiet. She should have felt victorious. But something was off. The acquisition had gone through smoothly, legally, irreversibly. She had the documents. The new board of directors answered to her. Even the nameplate on the front of the Claiborne Holdings building had been replaced with Silvra in sleek steel letters. Her father's legacy, his kingdom, now belonged to the daughter he never saw. So why did it feel like she just buried something instead of winning anything? Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Emily? The voice rasped. She froze. It had been years since she'd heard that voice tremble. Dad? There was a long silence on the other end, as if he was measuring whether he deserved to speak. I need to see you. Her fingers tightened around the phone. She could already feel the weight of what wasn't being said. Why? Because I didn't know. His voice cracked. I didn't know what I'd done, until it was too late. She didn't answer, didn't trust herself to. I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. Just 10 minutes, please. Emily stared at the city skyline, then closed her eyes. I'll come by after office hours, she said, and hung up. That evening, she pulled into the driveway of the Claiborne estate one final time. The house hadn't changed. Same pristine hedges, same carefully positioned lanterns glowing warm yellow. But it no longer felt like home. It felt like a set, and she was walking into someone else's scene. Frank was waiting in the study, glass of scotch untouched beside him. His face was thinner, the lines deeper, the weight of pride stripped clean from his eyes. You came, he said, almost like a question. I said I would, she replied, standing across from him, not sitting. He exhaled slowly. I was proud of you, you know. No, you weren't. Her voice didn't shake. You were proud of your sons. You tolerated your daughter. He winced. I didn't know how to love someone like you. That stopped her. She blinked. What does that mean? You weren't loud. You weren't easy. You didn't ask for attention. You earned it quietly. I didn't recognize that strength because I was weak. The confession hit her like a slow-moving wave, gentle but undeniable. Frank leaned forward, voice low. You remind me of my mother. Emily's breath caught. She was brilliant, sharp, unapologetic. My father hated it. She never shrank for anyone, and I saw what it cost her. I think, he paused. I think I was afraid of seeing her in you, because she died alone, and I didn't want to see that future again. Emily stared at him, stunned. In all her years under this roof, no one had ever spoken of her grandmother. She wasn't in your stories, she whispered. You always talked about your father. Because it was easier to glorify a man who never doubted himself than a woman who was always right. And suddenly, it wasn't just her father sitting across from her. It was a broken link in a chain of silence passed down for generations. A man who had been taught to fear women like her and had obeyed that fear. I didn't come here for an apology, she said, her voice trembling for the first time. And I'm not giving back what I took. Not because I hate you, but because I finally love myself enough not to. Frank nodded slowly. I know. I didn't want the last thing I said to you to be a joke at your expense. There was silence. Then, finally, she sat down. They didn't talk for long. 10 minutes, like he asked. He didn't beg. She didn't forgive. But something shifted. Not peace, but the beginning of it. The next morning, Emily received a letter, mailed, not emailed. It was from an estate attorney. Inside was a copy of her grandmother's will, dated 30 years ago. Attached was a note written in looping cursive. To the granddaughter I've never met. If you are anything like me, you'll grow up misunderstood. But don't let them tame you. The world doesn't belong to the loud. It belongs to the relentless. And someday, it will be yours. Tears slid silently down Emily's face. Not from pain, but from recognition. Her grandmother had left her shares in a company Emily never knew existed. But now, those shares made her the controlling interest in a land development project, a massive one in California, long stalled by family infighting. The twist? That project was Brandon's next big pitch, his Hail Mary. And now, it needed her signature. Have you ever discovered a legacy you didn't know was waiting for you? And did it change how you saw your past? Emily thought her reckoning was over, but some power isn't just inherited, it's weaponized. What she does next will change everything. Don't miss what unfolds in the next chapter. Emily stood at the edge of the ocean. The wind curled around her coat, tugging gently at her sleeves, but she didn't move. The waves, dark and moody beneath a gray Pacific sky, crashed and whispered at her feet. It was a quiet beach in Monterey, far from Seattle, far from the weight of family dinners and boardroom wars. In her hand was the letter from her grandmother, now folded and worn at the edges, ink beginning to fade. It had been 2 weeks since she became the deciding vote in Brandon's land development deal. He'd flown to Seattle the day after the news broke. His company had hit a wall, investors were getting nervous, and now everything hinged on her signature. He arrived at Silver's headquarters dressed in his best, charm weaponized, mask flawless. Em, he'd said, like nothing had happened. We can work together now. I mean, who better than us? Claibornes stick together, right? She didn't laugh, didn't blink. You mean the Claibornes who spent my entire life pretending I didn't exist? He'd opened his mouth to protest, to spin, but the truth had already laid itself bare. She let him pitch. Let him talk numbers and vision and market projections. She even let him believe, for a moment, that she was considering it. Then she slid the proposal back across the table. No. His jaw clenched. You'd really let this fall apart, just to prove a point? She met his gaze, calm and steady. No, Brandon. I'm letting it fall apart because for once, you need to learn what it feels like to not be the favorite. He stormed out, and just like that, the final pillar crumbled. That night, Emily didn't celebrate. There was no champagne, no headlines, no victory dance. She sat alone in her apartment, barefoot on the hardwood floor, staring at a photograph she hadn't touched in years. It was the last picture of all 5 of them. Frank, her mother, Brandon, Tyler, and her. Thanksgiving, maybe a decade ago. She was in the corner of the frame, blurry, caught mid-step on her way to refill a bowl no one would thank her for. It struck her that there would never be another picture like that again. Her mother had called earlier that week, quiet and unsure. asking if Emily might consider coming to visit. "I miss you," she'd whispered. "Not the success, not the press. You." And for the first time in a long time, Emily hadn't known what to say. Because success hadn't filled the cracks. Power hadn't replaced warmth. Yes, she had proven her worth. Yes, she had made them see her. But what she hadn't expected was how lonely that summit could be. She didn't regret her choices. She just wished they hadn't been necessary. And maybe, she thought now, as she watched the tide roll in, that was the real tragedy of it all. Not that she'd had to fight so hard to be seen, but that no one had seen her when it would have mattered most. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message. From Tyler. "I don't know how to fix everything, but I'm trying to see things now. I hope that counts for something." She stared at the message for a long time, then typed, "It does." She hit send, then tucked the phone away. A seagull called overhead. The air smelled like salt and something beginning. Back in Seattle, Claiborne Holdings was slowly being restructured under Silva's umbrella. Employees were being retrained, processes digitized. Frank had retired quietly, taking his morning walks alone through the city's foggy parks. Brandon filed for bankruptcy. Tyler, perhaps for the first time in his life, enrolled in business school on his own dime. And Emily? She didn't stay to watch it all unfold. She took a 6-month leave, closed her laptop, left the emails unread. She bought a 1-bedroom house overlooking the sea, planted succulents, read books with cracked spines, and watched the world go quiet around her. Not in punishment this time, but in peace. Sometimes she'd think about her grandmother's letter, the fierceness in those simple words. The world doesn't belong to the loud. It belongs to the relentless. She hadn't been born relentless. She had been made that way, by years of silence and a love that never reached her. But now, standing here, she realized something deeper. She had built a life without begging. She had created legacy from neglect. And most of all, she had reclaimed the name they tried to erase, Claiborne. Not for them, for herself. She turned back toward the little beach house behind her, light spilling from its windows like gold. For the first time, she was not running from anything. And that, she thought, was the real ending. Not revenge. Not justice. But peace. What moment in this story resonated most deeply with you, and why? Comment 100 if this story moved you. Where in the world are you watching from today? Share this with someone who needs a reminder. You don't need permission to rise. Thank you for watching Life Stories.